Education as a whole has become more, I like the word commodified. It's been more tied to sort of what you do with it at the end, i.e. get a job, right? So we've had a splintering of traditional academic disciplines like humanities, social sciences, into things like business, commerce, engineering, all valid trades. I'm not here to bitch about them. But you know, we have to understand that with that commodification comes a de-emphasis on things like critical thinking, understanding the world in which you live, appreciating different cultures, and so on. I think personally the reason that you have much more apathy here, and maybe I'm out on a limb, is twofold. One is that your generation has been utterly besieged by international affairs. They just didn't know it, right? You can't turn on a TV, you can't sort of, you know, read anything, you can't, you know, do anything on the internet basically without coming across some death and destruction and some depravity and some crisis, right? And that is, I'm not going to blame it on media and technology, but that's been a big facilitator of it. So the reason I pointed it out is because I think you guys have become somewhat immune to the humanity of it all. And I don't mean that callously. I think all of us, my generation too, has become somewhat immune. If you see it every day, you know, then it becomes sort of, less horrific and sort of, you know, less troublesome to you. And plus you're besieged constantly by multiple inputs, right? You've got your own lives, everyday lives, you know, family, friends, girlfriends, work, all that sort of stuff. But then also, you know, the gizmos and gadgets, and especially the internet, distract you utterly. So people are fatigued, I think, to some degree by this barrage, you know, endless barrage of being, you know, quote unquote global. Right? And you'd think it's a good thing, right? You think it would make us all much more appreciative and knowledgeable about it. But I think it's done the opposite. And I say that as a scholar of international affairs. And again, students, you know, take it sometimes personally when I say you're not as smart as they were 20 years ago. But, you know, there's that sort of factor, fatigue factor, let's call it, tends to make people less interested, less deeply concerned, less motivated. You know, I think back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even parts of the 80s, people didn't have all those inputs. They tended to sort of see these crises in a much more sort of, you know, microcosmic view. They looked at them, they imagined them a little bit more, they understood them maybe a little bit better. They were fairly unique to some degree, right? Not that suffering, you know, didn't exist elsewhere, but, you know, folks in the 80s rallied around these causes. And I think there is a generational input in the 60s in particular, the period I'm probably best equipped to discuss. You had a population born after, you know, during and after World War II that fundamentally questioned everything. Things like Vietnam, you know, became a sort of template for them to question everything. And the natural reflection of that is in things like music. So, you know, the protest of seeing their own country, particularly the United States, mired in this unbelievably savage war, you know, 3/4 of the way around the world with a bunch of people they'd never heard of before, you know, names they couldn't pronounce, not knowing clearly what they're fighting for, became a sort of icon of this protest, right, of this sort of reaction they had to their entire generation. And I think it's best seen in music, and it became the rallying cause, right? Not just in the States. We often forget that the Vietnam War had similar effects elsewhere, right, internationally. So it's not that there is no shortage of suffering and depth, you know, death and destruction today, but I think kids of today, if you like, generations, are more besieged by other inputs, and maybe, yeah, less aware and less trained and less educated about the interconnectivity that we all share. You know, anybody trying to sort of sift through this needs to look at context. They need to look at the historical context of these periods. So the 60s and 70s was full of fluffy, stupid music too, but you had this inner core of people that were expressing themselves artistically in reaction to fundamental changes societally, and they didn't have necessarily all of these other distractions, right? That's important to me. It's not, I don't think people today are any less capable or less intelligent innately. I just think that we haven't provided them with the tools educationally, and that they are so profoundly distracted, and I think that's the good word.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.